this concept that you'll hear a lot talked about, and we've kind of touched on it. I've used the word a little bit already, and that is alignment. But alignment is a word that can kind of be used for lots of different things. So I want to help make this clear as well. We talked a little bit about our beliefs and our desires coming into alignment and how that helps the flow of energy and the momentum created. There is also this state of being that is described as being in alignment. And this is an experience that is commonly known to athletes and musicians and artists. It's that when you're in the zone or in the flow or your state of genius, where it's just like, I feel like I can do no wrong. It's the athlete who just has the magic hand, right? They're making every basket, just in that place of like, everything is just flowing and working out perfectly for me. Energetics, this is often simply just referred to as being in alignment, because all that you now are and all that you are becoming are energetically in harmony or alignment with each other. And that is what creates that magical feeling is we are whole. We are in touch with the wholeness of who we are, which is our desired state. We don't want to be in a state that is split, where we have pieces of ourselves in different places. We want to be operating from this state of wholeness. But how do we get there? How do we find this state of being? That becomes part of the tricky thing. And also, this is where kind of our beach ball analogy comes into play. This state of being is like floating on the top of the water. And it can be nerve-wracking to think that this gets to be my state of being far more regularly, that it's not this denser, heavy one on the bottom of the pool. So in understanding how to experience this more, we're going to look a little bit deeper into beliefs and emotions. We have this beautiful guidance system that we've been given, which is our emotions. It is the guidance system to helping us figure out how close we are to our current state of what we are experiencing and the wholeness of what we are, bringing those together. And then we do that through our emotions. So if you'll remember, our emotions are the third expression of our energetic state. We have the energetic, the mental, the emotional, and then the physical. And so they are a natural indicator for us of the energetic state that we are in. A lot of us are not sensitive enough to be very in tune or aware of the actual energy itself. We need something more physical, more tangible to help give us a reference point of the energy that we're playing in. And that's where the mental and the emotional come into play. But before we can really understand the role of our emotions, we need to take one step back and look at the mental expression, namely our beliefs. That's that second stage. And when I say beliefs, I am talking about like, yes, Jenna.
Okay, sorry, can you say the stages again? Energetic, then
energetic, mental, emotional, and then physical.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And if you're looking or reading things elsewhere online, these are sometimes called like the different bodies that we have. We have a physical body, then we have an emotional body, mental body, and an energetic body. Okay. So when I'm talking about beliefs, I am talking about like our human, mortal, physical thoughts, patterns, and programming. But our beliefs are not in vacuum. They are beliefs in relationship to the beliefs of God, source, our higher self, the universe. You'll see lots of different terms out there. But this energetic perspective, to me, is really about getting our will and God's will into alignment, or what I call divine alignment. This idea of the beliefs that I have that I'm thinking about this situation, about this subject matter, do they match the way God views this subject matter? And my goal is to get those two into divine alignment. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But for now, what I mean by saying our emotions are a manifestation of our current beliefs in relationship to the beliefs held by God, what I mean is when you think something and it feels good, it's because it's in divine alignment with the way God, source, or your higher self thinks or feels about that subject. And when you feel a negative emotion, it's because, in divine alignment, positive emotion. Negative emotion is because you are out of divine alignment with the way God, source, or your higher self thinks or feels about that subject. So in this way, our emotions can become this really cool guidance system we have for how well we are aligned or not. We've lost a lot of this understanding though, because we've gotten really caught up in the external descriptions, rules, regulations, patterns of behavior and thought, that at first this idea can seem a little like confusing or even wrong, right? Because it almost sounds like I'm saying, okay, so if I feel good about hurting somebody, then that's in alignment with God or my higher self. Like God wants me to hurt somebody. And to which I say, not quite. And it takes a little bit more understanding to see what I mean by that. And this is where the emotional guidance scale comes into play, which I'm gonna share my screen here again. Oh, we had 2 more people in the waiting room. Dang it, I've got to do better at watching the waiting room. Gonna let them connect. Heidi and Nicole. Okay, they're still connecting their audio. So we'll give them a second. Hi, Heidi, welcome. I apologize. I hope you haven't been in the waiting room too long. I've not been very good at watching who's been in there. So welcome. You will get the replay.
Thank you.
On some of the beginning stuff. We are right now about to be talking about the importance of emotions, because the focus we've had today, well, actually, the focus we've had, Nicole is still coming in here too. So let me wait for her to connect and then we'll catch you both up a little bit. And in the meantime, I'm going to be getting my screen ready to share. Nicole, can you hear us? Screen sharing. So just to fill you in, Heidi, because it looks like Nicole might be having some technical difficulties here for a sec. Today is day 1. We're focusing a lot on the internal part of decluttering ourselves and how that relationship between our state of being mentally and emotionally affects our ability to manage and how we run our lives and our homes and things. And in day 2 next week, so next Saturday, that's when we're going to be doing a lot of the practical applications of what we're talking about today. So that will be a lot more of the hands-on home organizing piece, and today is more of the energetic understanding bit. So we've been talking a bit about some of the basics of energetics and how this works, but you're actually in a good place to come in right now. This is a good starting point. For anything that you are unaware of or have questions, feel free to let me know. We've been having some good dialogue here throughout, so feel very open to ask any questions. And you will be getting the replay, so you can go back and watch the beginning for the things that you missed. So the first thing we're talking about right now is how our emotions. Let's see. There we go. Okay, I think we're unmuted now. We're talking about our emotions and the role that they play, because our emotions are simply an expression of our energy. And so our emotions, though, are also an indicator of how aligned our beliefs are with the beliefs God, source, our higher self, the universe. You'll hear lots of different terms used in secular spirituality. I like to personally choose the term God, but choose whichever one feels most correct for you. How did they view it, right? So I think a thought about a situation, and if it feels good, that means it is aligned with the way God's or source views that subject matter. And if it feels bad, it's because my belief is out of alignment with that of God's or source. And so our goal is to learn how to bring our beliefs into that experience where they are matching with God's, because that's where to me, that is in essence aligning our will with God's will. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. What we were just getting into, though, is the idea of this kind of sounds like I'm saying, if I feel good about something like hurting somebody else, that's in alignment with God or my higher self. Like God's okay with me hurting somebody, wants me to hurt somebody. To which I was just about to explain why that's not quite right, in which we need to understand the emotional guidance scale, which is what we're pulling up right now. Now, the emotional guidance scale was created by Esther Hicks, and it's a really cool tool where essentially she's taken different emotions and assigned them like a vibrational density, you could say, with the ones over here, joy, knowledge, empowerment, freedom, love, appreciation being higher in vibration, and the lowest ones being here, fear, grief, depression, powerlessness, victim. And then this whole range in between. Now, the idea is that in order for us to feel good, or more accurately, bring some sense of relief, you must be coming from a lower state into a higher state. So, sorry, this is in reference to the like, I want to hurt somebody experience and not feeling good, right? This is because you were probably hanging out somewhere in this experience of like, very powerless, very fear, very insecure, and you have now moved up to a state of revenge. And so, on this scale, you are progressing and moving forward. And so what that positive feeling is not so much about the action, but about the relative movement of your internal state of being. So it's saying, yes, you're progressing in the right direction. I don't want you to hang out and stay in revenge or necessarily act on that thing that you feel good about, but I do want you to continue progressing in this direction that you're moving. And so that's how our emotions are this indicator of where we're going. And this is a concept that can be really good to be aware of, because sometimes we have this thing of like, okay, I'm feeling, insecure or unworthy, and I just need to like jump over here to be more optimistic or hopeful. But that's a really big jump, energetically speaking, like really big to make. And depending on the amount of momentum you have active, trying to make that kind of jump might actually energetically not even be possible right now. You need to slow that freight train way down before you can make that kind of jump. And part of how we do that is progressing through these different stages. So you may move, a common thing that you'll see in the life coaching industry is talking about the blame shame cycle. Shame is the ultimate lowest one, in my opinion. And blame, you'll see, is much higher up here. So when we experience shame, there's this common thought pattern of like, oh, that doesn't feel very good. Energetically speaking, yeah, it doesn't feel very good. It is like the most dense energy we can experience. So we don't want to feel that. So we're going to jump to a different energetic state. Often we choose blame, which feels a lot better than shame. But then sometimes we feel bad for blaming somebody else and it drops us right back down into shame. And so that's where it's like not understanding that this is a progressive cycle. We tend to just bounce around this whole experience all over the place, rather than beginning to recognize like, okay, as you'll see a lot more commonly today, talking about the importance of feeling our negative emotions and allowing them and holding space for them. That's because that often helps us move through this cycle and find that relief that's moving upward. And so it's good sometimes, like, sorry, too many thoughts. This is what I'm trying to say. There are moments where we are experiencing these lower ones. They're very internal, usually, like we're not expressing them a lot. And so when we're experiencing that, women in particular tend to jump over or skip these emotions and try and bypass them and jump to some other one, because these are usually experiences that are a lot more loud or vocal. And if you as a woman in particular are seen as being angry or vocal or loud, that can often be interpreted as things getting worse because it's getting louder rather than, no, this is good. You are not hanging out down here in this more powerless state. This scale is ultimately from powerless to empowered. That is always the goal of progressively moving up. And so that's actually not necessarily a bad thing to experience anger and to allow that, because again, that may be shifting us out of an experience that we have a lot of momentum along, helping slow it down so we can shift our train and move over here. This whole half of the spiral is all about getting relief from our resistance. Our resistance, which is our thought beliefs, right, that are out of alignment. That resistance is what's creating this density. And so anytime we are moving upward in the scale, we are finding relief from that resistance. We are shifting our beliefs. And so they are coming more and more into that divine alignment. Then we get over eventually and flip into this side. And sometimes well, hang on, we'll get to that in a second. This side of the experience is stage 2, and this is the state of allowing. This is allowing the beach ball to be at the top surface, whereas this is removing all of that junk we've put on top of it. Because sometimes when we get over here and we start experiencing it, we're like, oh my gosh, this is so fun, but like, when is the other shoe going to drop? Like, when is the bad thing going to happen in my life again? And so we don't allow ourselves to stay here long enough. We'll actually put ourselves back into some other thing that feels lower because it's more familiar. And we'll be talking about on day 2 a little bit more about how this affects us biologically, because we also have biological programming that's going on and playing into all of this as well. Because our bodies are wanting to try and keep us safe, and they get programmed by our repetitive thought patterns and beliefs. So if we've spent a lot of time building thought patterns and beliefs that are in this downward half of the spiral, our body is actually going to be trying to pull us back into that experience repeatedly. So becoming aware of that can also help make it easier for us to learn how to stay here in this state more. But the first part of this process, again, is just learning how to find that relief from resistance. And as you start getting better and better at that, then it will start shifting into learning how to allow that positive experience to be there. But this is also like a pendulum in a way, right? So it's not like when you're in stage 1, you're always here. Like, we move back and forth between the two, but the goal is over time to get more centered and better at holding this state of being more and more active in our field at any given time. Okay, lots of stuff there. Questions, thoughts?
Like a line graph, like a line graph, just at least like a little bit of an upward slope, like overall.
Yes. And the cool thing is when you add momentum in, overall, it becomes an exponential, and it like whoosh, will pick up really quickly. And so that's the piece too, is can you get to that? Can you hold it long enough with those small increments, especially when you're in the first stage of the downward spiral? That's where it's a lot slower because you've got all that resistance. The more you clean that up, then you hit this inflection point and the momentum. Cool analogy there.
So I have it's not a fully formed question. It's just a thought, like thinking like the dynamic between me and my spouse, and feeling like I really, and perhaps this is kind of maybe perhaps the empath in me, but how much I feed off of him, and I feel like we both struggle with being kind of lower on the scale, and I feel like I worry that if I learn to overcome and stuff and get up, that it's gonna just feel drained and sucked back to match his energy. Do you have thoughts on that, of combating
so
or
much.
flipping, or what to do with that?
So much.
Okay.
Yes, wonderful question. Because yes, this is part of my experience as well. Okay, so a big part of this is most of the time we're not actively aware of where our energy is coming from, what we're picking it up on, where we're setting it, right? It's usually externally motivated. So we interact with this person, they're having a grumpy day. So we set our energy to that. We match them, we join them, we play in it, we amplify it together, right? The whole misery loves company type of thing. What part of this process is learning to do is from taking that shift of being externally dependent to internally dependent. And as you get better at this, you become able to set your energetic set point and hold it and allow space for other people to have their own and not get entangled up with each other. And so that's a whole process to learn how to do that, how to get good at that, how to navigate that. That's a lot of what I work on with my private clients specifically, is building up that strength, building up the tools, building up the abilities. But a big part of it begins with just recognizing, okay, actually backing up. A big part of all energetic work comes to what we do beforehand. It's in essence, instead of being on a computer and it's filled with lots of viruses, and so it's just popping up all sorts of window screens and we're just reacting to whatever comes up, and no, I don't want that, close that down. And we're trying to, get to the internet to get to the site we want, but there's all this other stuff coming up. Instead, you want to get out ahead of it. Energetically, you always want to see, what can I do before I have a lot of this momentum going? Because once the momentum is going, it's so much harder. But that momentum usually is showing up. The more momentum there is, the more it starts to show up more tangibly as a thought, as an emotion, as something that's physically playing out in our world. So that's why we usually recognize it then, because it's in front of us now. It's not in the energetic state. But if you can learn, okay, I want to get there before all this momentum has been created, and set what energy do I want to start getting active and start building the momentum, that can make it easier. Now, here's an example of what this would look like in your life. This would be like your husband does something, it drives you nuts. We want to make a comment. We want to address it right then and there, because it's like, oh my gosh, quit doing this, right? But the energy that you're in is, you're the problem. I'm frustrated with you. I don't like this. So energetically, the subtext of that conversation, even if you put it in words that's like, hey, honey, this really bothers me. I don't want to. If you are in that energy of then that's what's going to be coming across. And most people respond in conversation to the underlying energetics, not actually to the words. And that's why you can say things, but people don't hear it, or they don't respond the way you want to. And it's like, that's not what I meant at all. It's because we're actually really good at paying attention to each other's energy. We're just not even aware that that's what's going on, or that's the subtext of the conversation. So there are times where it can be more beneficial to be like, okay, gonna make a mental note. I just had a contrasting experience. I recognize a desire that I have that is not being expressed in my experience the way I want. I'm gonna go calm down for a minute and then come back and let's talk about this. Or I'm gonna wait till it's date night and we're in this positive space where it's constructive and we're wanting to work together on finding the solution. That's getting the energetics into a good place first, and then addressing whatever it is you're wanting to change, rather than always doing it in the moment. This can also look like, if there's a spot that okay, we do have to have this difficult conversation, we're going to be talking about money or something, can you take a minute before you enter into that conversation? Breath is really powerful, brings you into the body, gets you calm, gets you in that state of allowing rather than resistance. We usually have some sort of resistance that we're very active that we bring with us into that conversation. So it's like, crap, we've got to talk about money again or whatever. And so we're feeling that anxiousness. What can you do to be in that state of, I'm not in survival mode, I'm in thriving mode. Things are good. This is not a crisis. I don't need to be stressed about this. Everything is working out. And in day 2, we'll go through a little bit more of some of the things you can do with your body to help your body with this. But that's, again, setting the energetics beforehand so that then when you enter the conversation, you're starting more positive momentum rather than the negative momentum around it. Does that start to kind of answer that? Yeah.
Yes.
As I look at
One
this,
thing that just popped
oh,
to
sorry.
mind is, sorry.
No, finish up a minute. We'll get to you in one
Okay.
sec.
It-
No, finish up a minute. We'll get to you
Okay,
in one sec.
just one more thing. Thinking about like changing the momentum and kind of doing it in steps. How does that work when I feel like I come with a negative, or one of us, I shouldn't say just me, comes with a really, we're in a good state, and then it just feels like it's totally derailed by a negative energy and it sucks. It's like how, like,
Yeah, so part of this is understanding the role of contrast. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second with the 4 steps of creation, because that's going to come into play there. But the short answer I'm going to give you right now is this is practice. Like, this is not a thing where it's like, okay, I want to shift this momentum. I want to get better at this. Like, especially when we're looking at your energetic system. A lot of this ability comes from your 3rd chakra, which is your power chakra. And that one actually operates different than your other ones. It is more like a muscle. And so if you haven't been using it, it is more weak. And the more you learn to use it, the stronger it gets and your ability to hold this. So the short answer is like literally just practice and like expect in the beginning, especially, there's going to be a lot of times where it's like, okay, I'm going to try and shift out of the momentum and it's not going to happen. And you're still going to get caught up in it. And that's going to be okay. But that's going to be part of, okay, I'm becoming more aware of this. I'm becoming more in tune with this. I know more, because here's the other piece. It's going to start shifting where you're going to internally want it more than externally need it. Because usually there's some sort of need. I need you to behave well. I need you to not throw a temper tantrum at the store. I need you to hear me and understand this. I need you to pick up your socks. Like, whatever that need is, that's external. And so usually that's what's getting in the way in the belief and creating some of that resistance is our dependency on that need. Going back to our beliefs and how there's the expectation and the attachment, need is very much the attachment. It's what keeps us stuck in that thing and recreating the resistance over and over and over again. And so there will come, as you start practicing this over time, it will get to a place where it's like, I care more about feeling good than I do about needing this thing to change externally. And that's part of what you're practicing and being used to. Quick story to kind of illustrate this and make it more tangible. When I was first working as a professional organizer, I was awesome at like working in other people's homes, but my home was still a disaster. And I felt like a little bit of a fraud. And I was wanting to like implement and practice more of these things myself. And one of them was I wanted to clean up my home every evening so that I could wake up and it was like clean and like felt like I was starting the day fresh rather than waking up and I'm already behind because like yesterday's dishes are still there. There's still crap everywhere and laundry that wasn't folded and toys and whatever. And in the beginning, I felt like I needed it to be clean in order to have a good morning. And so I set out the goal of like, okay, I'm going to try cleaning it up first. And when I did that, the next morning was like, oh yeah, okay, this is really nice. But I wasn't very good at being able to maintain that because it wasn't internal yet. And so maybe I did it for like a day, maybe 2. And then it was like something had happened and I'm like, I'm too tired. I'm going to bed. I'm not dealing with this tonight. And I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be like, this is so not fun. I liked it much better when I woke up to a clean house. I wish I could do that better. And I didn't create any strict rules. I just kind of focused on how was I feeling. And so I scaled it back and I first focused on like, okay, just clearing off the kitchen table or just cleaning up my nightstand or the bedroom floor, just picking like one space that I would focus on. And over time, my desire to have that positive feeling in the morning naturally became more powerful than my resistance to doing it at night. And so I would get ready to go to bed and be like, okay, I can go to bed. or I can tidy this up because I know in the morning I'm going to like that more. And so as that grew stronger, I started doing it more and more naturally. And part of that was also, it was not this overbearing masculine where it was like, I have to do it every night, right? There was that flexibility of what feels good today and giving myself that time to naturally grow and adjust into that. And then as I got good at like, okay, every night I clean up my bedroom floor because I love waking up to a clean bedroom and I sleep so much better. And like, yes, this is great. My internal ability grew. So then I could add on the kitchen counters, and then I could add on sweeping the floor, and then I could add on cleaning up the dishes until it finally grew enough that it was like, I can regularly in like 10 to 20 minutes get the whole house picked up and cleaned and go to bed and wake up with a fresh house, right? That's kind of the process and the goal, and that shift from the external. That help? And that's part of stuff we'll go into on day 2 is like how to do that, what that looks like. Kirsten, I think you had some thoughts or questions.
Yeah, you did answer a bit of what I was thinking of, because I was thinking of how to like authentically move up on the emotion scale, because I think for a long part of my life, it was a lot of toxic positivity where I just like, shut down my emotions and had to be a certain way, right? And like skipped levels. And then, I can see now how my body probably did store that. And I'm working through like breaking those habits and letting myself like fully write out my emotions instead of holding on to them. And so I'm just like wondering, okay, how do you find that balance of like sitting with those emotions and working through them, like the negative ones, but also having that upward reach, authentically to get the desire where you want it to be? Because that sounds super hard.
Beautiful question. Yes, so we're going to step into this with the 4 steps of creation. But the short answer is ultimately the whole point of this is really coming to trust that internal emotional guidance system and trusting and caring the most about feeling good. That has to become the priority, because that's where you can then listen to your guidance system directing you to what's the next best thing. And this is what I mean by that is when you have that moment and it's like, okay, do I need to sit with this and like process and cry and journal to like get it out? If I am thinking about doing that and it feels like, yes, this is what I need to do, and it feels better, it gives me that sense of relief, that's the guidance for it. There are other times where it's like thinking about doing that, it's like, no, that just sounds miserable. I don't want to dwell on that. I don't want to go there. Like, I just want to, again, I'm going to shift my focus, because that will also change the energy, right? We don't always have to dig deep into it. If we can just move the energy, by default, there's no energy flowing to that negative thing anymore. It will eventually die out. But usually the things we have trapped in our energy systems have some like sneaky little energy thing that's continually being fed there by some belief. So we need to go journal or cry or process to find out what that is, what that attachment is, and cut it off. Other ones, they're not as strong. We just get sometimes caught up in that healing processing cycle because we didn't do it for so long. And once we started doing it, it was good. And it was like, okay, yes, I'm learning how to feel these emotions. Learning to feel emotions is one of the first things you have to be able to do is, can you feel them? Can you identify them? And as you grow through that, then it can start becoming, okay, actually, I'm going to go shift my perspective to something else. And that's the way I'm going to create the energetic change. And that feels better. That feels more authentic. So you start using your own internal guidance to help you navigate what is the thing I need to do in any given situation. Even coming back to our like cleaning the house thing, is tonight one of those nights where I do need to clean it up? And that's what I'm going to do. Or is tonight one of the nights I need to leave the dishes in the sink and go cuddle with my husband before we go to bed, right? It's not, there is no black and white. There is no, in this circumstance, you do this. And in this circumstance, you do that. It is learning your own internal guidance system and really learning how to trust that. And First, we're breaking down a lot of the mistrust we've built. We're learning how to feel, we're learning how to process. And then the second stage of this is we're starting to build that up and actively become more and more aware of it. So this is a big picture process. It is that shift from external dependent to internal dependent. It is not a single jump that we make. It is lots and lots of those 1% shifts that gets us to that greater state. So hopefully that starts to answer a little bit.
Yeah, I really like what you said about the beliefs, especially like how, you know, a lot of times it is a reoccurring belief that keeps us stuck in that. And so, you know, maybe to sit in that space if you need to, and that's what feels right at the time, long enough to think about like, okay, what belief has brought me to this level, this low, and how can I, you know, like what beliefs do I want to have, and how do I, you know, like permanently have a higher belief so that it's not so low on the scale. Yeah, that's profound.
Good. I'm glad that connected with you. Other thoughts here before we move on to the next piece?
I have a question. So like fear and grief are at the very bottom of the scale, and shame, and then joy's at the top. But can you speak to like the connection between those two? Like I can go from like laughing hysterically to being like so sad and grieving, like crying to laughing. It's like, how do we jump from like this low thing to this high thing? Like, what is that?
Yes. So coming back to, again, what are we plugged into? We tend to think there's a single plug, that one here and another here. There's actually lots and lots of different ones that are active in your system. So usually if something like that is happening, there's a couple of different things that can be going on. One is it's like you're happy and joyful about a relationship in your life or a fun experience. But then when you're shifting to the plug of my home or my responsibilities or work or something like that, that plug is in a different vibrational state. So there's lots of ones that we have active in us and going on for the various parts of our lives. And those can sum up to an overall experience. So sometimes it's about recognizing, okay, am I jumping between two different plugs and what's going on there? Sometimes it is literally like that quickly that things can shift or move. And that just might be the experience based on what your focus is and what your flow is. And so it maybe your focus was on this really good thing, and that's where the flow was. And so that's why you had that positive, beautiful experience. And then you shift your focus to something else and you have a misaligned belief or desire about that. And so the energy is not reaching it. And now you're feeling the overwhelm with that experience. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes. I think sometimes it's like, it happens and I'm not even like aware of like what my focus is on. It's just like strong emotions. Okay, let's have all the good ones and all the bad ones at the same time. It's like, but maybe like subconsciously I am like thinking about different things or something. It's just like a whole emotional experience that I don't even know what's happening.
Exactly. Well, and that's because we first learn to be externally connected, right? And so we're experiencing our world through the external environment of what's going on. And so it feels like these emotions are just happening to me. These experiences are just happening to me. And I'll do a teaser for day 2 in that we've talked about, we have the energetic, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. Well, it actually goes both ways. The physical can trigger the emotional, can trigger the mental, can trigger the energetic. So we program it this way, and then our body is like a computer that feeds the program back to us. And so it can be one of those things where you get into a place where it's like, oh, hey, it's 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. We've learned that the emotion she feels right here is anxious and stressed because she's got to start the day. So we're going to feed the hormones and run the thought patterns to get her thinking, hey, you should be stressed about today because it's Monday morning on 8 o'clock, right? And so that is like not us intending that. That is our body doing the other half of the cycle. And so part of this process is learning how can, in the beginning, part of that resistance is actually coming from your body, because it's like, no, this is not our normal state. Our normal state is to be anxious on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. It is not to be, yeah, it's going to be a great day and I'm so excited and I can't wait to wake up, right? That's a whole new programming that we have to run and get our body to shift with too. And so when you can start understanding this process and you start working from both ends, from your body and from the energetic piece, that's where you can start seeing the most changes quickly because you're integrating all the different parts, all the different layers to create these shifts. But in the beginning, right, it is just very much like, this is just happening. I don't know what's going on. I'm not aware, right? There's a big process of like 80% of the work is just becoming aware and like understanding, oh, that's what was going on. Oh, that's what was going on. Like,
Okay, yes, that totally makes sense. Thank you.
oh, you're good. Other thoughts or questions? Okay, then we are going to jump on to our final topic here, and that is the 4 steps of creation. These I've previously talked about as 3 steps. I got the insight the other day that it's actually 4. So if you've learned from me in the past and have heard 3 steps, we're breaking one of them up into 2 because it creates a really cool dynamic when we understand it that way. And I'm actually looking at my pre-drawn picture and realizing kids have made it not as clear. So I'm going to redraw it. So hang with me one sec. So the first step though, and this is, okay, backing up. When I say the step of the 4 steps of creation, you will often find this sort of talked about in secular spirituality as how to manifest something, which we touched on a little bit before. Usually sounds like if I stay in this high vibration, if I have this positive thing, then the universe will bring me whatever I want. And we talked about how that's not the case. Law of attraction is more like gravity, and in that it is a force and that it just simply amplifies whatever signals are out there and just brings us more of that here. This process is based off of lots of different things that I've studied in different pieces into my version of how that manifesting process actually takes place. How do we go from a spiritual energy to a physical, tangible experience? And a lot of this is, again, based off of Esther Hicks. I love a lot of her work and have studied it a lot. So that's where this is coming from. How do we take this thought, this desire, this thing that I want, and make it a reality and experience in my world? So that first step is what I call to ask. This is also where we desire, where we dream, where we imagine, where we want, where we long, where we crave. All of those are expressions of asking. We tend to think, specifically with a lot of the scriptures, right? There's so many out there, ask and you shall receive. That's the whole overarching theme here, spoiler alert. But the asking is less about us like verbally praying or saying asking literally, and more about the desire of our hearts. This first step is all about that desire, which again, energetically speaking, we know the importance of desire. Usually we're not actually aware of the actual desires we have active, especially as women. One example of this, I kind of shared a little bit of my story after my second son was born and I had all these complications and was in the hospital. There was, if you had asked me what my desire was, I would have said, oh, my desire is to get healed and feeling better and go home. But actually the underlying desire was to feel supported and taken care of. And because that was the true desire underneath, that was more active. I was not, sorry, backing up. Let me find a clearer way to say this. What I needed was to be healed and to get home. What I actually wanted was to be supported and taken care of. And as women in particular, it is often difficult for us to get in touch with our desires and our needs. We kind of mix them up and think that our need is our desire. So learning how to see what is my desire, what is the actual underlying thing that I want. We're not very good at letting ourselves want things. It's selfish, it's bad, it's, there are so many other things that I care about. And if I desire something, if I want something, then we almost feel like that negates or takes away from the things that I should want or the things that I do need. But desire is the foundation of dream, of creation. Coming back to the analogy I shared at the beginning of everything is created spiritually before it is physically, and that this water bottle physically here in my experience started out as a desire somebody had for being able to have water with them when they need it, rather than having to walk down to the stream and go find it and get a drink, right? That was a whole process, and it began with desire. Alma even teaches again the process of faith. It starts with, can you have a desire? That small desire to believe. The desire and the belief pattern is there. They're connected to each other. So this first step, what is it we want? And as we allow ourselves to desire, to want, that is us essentially asking for it, putting it out there, saying, this is the thing that I want to experience. So I'm going to draw.
Sorry, can I say something real quick?
Yeah, please.
Knowing that this is the first step of creation, I think for those of us here that believe that we were created by, either heavenly parents or a higher being, I think that it just adds another level to how beautiful it is to be created by these parents, that their very first reason for creating us was their desire to have us and to be their parents to us. So I think that's amazing. Yeah.
I love that. I had never put it in that context. That is so beautiful. Thank you. Oh, this is why I love doing these things. You guys always bring such great insights into this as well. So, step one, ask, desire. There's this thing and I want it. This is our first step. Well, actually, I'm going to do that later. Step two, we're going to go there. Step two is not actually our part. Step two is entirely done by God. And this is what I call the garden. So this is a construct, an idea. There's a reason why this exists. Whether this is literally how it works or not, I don't know, but there's a reason that I say this is the second step. So hang with me for a second. The idea is God then says, okay, yeah, I've heard the desires of your hearts. I know what it is you want. I am now creating non-physically that thing that you want. And it's here in the garden and you can come and get it whenever you want. So what we have asked for is now being created non-physically. We don't have any role in this part, but it's a critical step, and you'll see why in just a sec. And the reason I like to think of it as a garden is because it's like this beautiful place where all the things that I desire are waiting for me. All these gifts from God are there, but they're non-physical right now. That's important. Step three is also God's part. And this is where I used to have them merged together into one step, if you've heard me talk about this in 3 steps before. But this third step is God then puts together all the cooperative components in order for us to go from where we are now to the garden where everything that we want is waiting for us. Now, cooperative components are things like the right conversation we need to have, the right experience we need to have, the information or people we need to come in contact with. This is all of the pieces of the puzzle that we're usually spending our time trying to figure out what they are and how to get them and where to find them, when actually this is the second part of God's role. in this creation process. This whole creation process for us is a co-creative one. It is us and God working together to bring about the desires that we have into physical manifestation in our experiences. And then step 4 is receive. And this is, in essence, we have moved to a state where we are now in the garden and thus able to access and experience all that God had for us. And it is now tangibly here for us to experience. So instead of in the traditional manifesting process, right, I think something positively that I want and God brings it to me from the garden, we are the ones that are moving, not the thing that we want. Okay. So another way to look at this is we create this spiritually. So we create first spiritually by our dreams, our desires, the things we imagine, want. Hang on, let me see. If you're not muted, can you mute yourself? We're getting a little feedback. At least I am. Okay, we're good. So we first spiritually create, then God spiritually creates, then God physically creates, and then we physically create. So a tangible example of how this works would be, this is, hang on, there's something else I'm supposed to say. I'm just trying to figure out what it is. Okay, here's the piece of it. The thing that brings our desire into physical experience is that we have aligned ourselves with what God has already created. So this is, again, coming back to that idea of aligning our will with God's will. We tend to think about that in terms of like, there's this mysterious thing that God wants for my life, and I've got to figure out what that is and then go do it. Instead of saying, hey, God's like, hey, what do you want to experience? And then I'm going to not only create non-physically that experience for you, but also set up how you can experience that. Will you be willing to become the person who can then experience that? And if you are, then you will get to experience it. And so it's this little bit of a shift there. And part of the question that then tends to come up is like, okay, but who am I to know what I really want and what I should be asking for and what I should be desiring? And like, what if I pick something that's like bad or that God doesn't want for me or something like that? A piece of this is recognizing all of these desires are innately given to us from God, basically. That's where they first are. And so we can trust in learning to get in touch with our desires, those things that we want. They feel good because, going back to what we talked about earlier, they are in divine alignment because they came from God. That's why it feels good, ultimately, once we remove all the resistance, to want something, to imagine, to dream, to long. Generally, question.
I guess it's more of a comment. I'm just noticing this is such a beautiful example of parenting and how what we do as parents, how like if our child needs to learn how to cross the street and we hold their hand and we tell them what to do and we walk across with them while they're really little, but eventually our goal is for them to be able to do it themselves. And so I'm looking at these steps. It's like, okay, we figure out, we ask, and then those two middle parts, God's middle parts, this is him or them, him or her, the universe, whoever, walking us through that. Like, this is how you do it. And I'm going to help you because you don't know how to do this yet. But ultimately, I think it's like we when we get to that place, we skip the 2 and 3 and we just go from here's me spiritually creating, here's me physically creating. I think this is God's ultimate plan, is to help us to become that.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And like I was saying earlier, we sometimes get out of whack that either it's bad for me to want, so we cut ourselves off here and mess up the process. We think this is our job. I need to figure out all the steps, all the things I've got to do. How do I make the money, fix the marriage, raise my kids, whatever, rather than trust that God has this worked out. He's going to guide me exactly where I need to go, to the things I need, to the experiences, to the thoughts, to the feelings, to everything that I need along that way, so that I can then experience it afterwards. So we tend to think this is our job and that this is God's job. Like, oh, this thing that showed up in my life, that came from God. And why was I lucky to get it and somebody else didn't get it? Like, that's messed up. Why is God giving it to me instead of them? Rather than viewing it's like, oh, this person walked, followed this thing, whatever, and arrived at that place. And we all have the opportunity to arrive at that place to receive those things. So yeah, lots of other thoughts or questions coming up here. Amanda.
Yeah, just this made me feel so like I feel Spirit so strongly thinking about this process and Joseph of Egypt and thinking about his journey. And in the beginning, it makes me think, you know, he had desires to be loyal to his family and to protect them and save them, and those kind of things. And the journey that he went on, the way that God orchestrated his path in order to be in this place where he was the physical savior of his family. But I think about sometimes we like he had to go through some crazy things to get that. And it just made me think of like sometimes the things that we desire, especially, I mean, whether it's just on this earth or eternal life, if we're thinking about the biggest thing, like it's not always the smoothest path. It's not the easiest path. So that's where trials play their part as catalysts to move us down that path so we can reach the destination. So I just really like thinking of Joseph in Egypt in correlation.
I'm glad you brought that up because that ties us into our next thing here, which is the importance of this second step. Why is it so important that something is created intangibly first? And this has to do with contrast, which is the word I use instead of in the scriptures. It says it must needs be, there's opposition in all things. The reason that opposition or contrast exists is so that we have something to compare our progress to, where we are and where we want to be. Without that contrasting experience, we have no sense of direction of where we're moving along, trying to be aligned so that we can receive all the cooperative components that God has gathered for us so that we can step into this place we want to be. This spiritual creation is creating that non-physical thing for us to compare to, which comes back to our beliefs and our emotions and that divine alignment. And sometimes it's actually good to be out of that divine alignment, to be experiencing the contrast, because that's what's giving us clarity about what that next thing is that we need. And so there is this misunderstanding of like, okay, we just talked about this emotional guidance scale and we've talked about how we want to be experiencing the primary experience of our life is to have more joy and to be operating from that space. But that doesn't mean we negate all the rest of the emotions. They serve a very important purpose in helping us find that path with all the cooperative components there. It's like, how do I know where to find this road that God has laid out for me? And they say, based on your emotions, based on the contrast. So we may have the desire of like, I want a close relationship with my spouse. And the road there is all mapped out for us to be able to desire and have that physical experience in our relationship. But part of our ability to find that path may be we need to have the contrasting moment where we're gathering some data, and that happens via fight. And we got some clarity around like, oh, okay, this is something I didn't want to experience. This is something that is not part of or something that needs to be adjusted or shifted, or is giving me more clarity about a belief that is not in alignment with the desire that I want of our relationship being this way. And so as we're going through these experiences we common describe as trials, it almost sounds like stumbling blocks, the way we tend to talk about it, that are put in our path that make it harder for us to progress, rather than in the Monday session, somebody put it so beautifully, summed it up in saying that life is a test, but we didn't come to Earth to be tested. We came to Earth to do the testing ourselves. So that stumbling block is not so much a stumbling block as it is an experiment. We are putting ourselves out there. We're testing something. We're vocalizing. We're having this experience so that we can get the feedback on it. And that gives us additional clarity to help us find more and more of those cooperative components. And so part of where we get stuck is in the decision-making process. You know, we've got this desire active. God has created it non-physically. He's got all of the cooperative components lined up. Now we're ready to start moving. That second step is to start taking inspired action. But normally we get caught up in like, what is the right thing? What is the thing I'm supposed to do that will give me a good day or a good marriage or help keep me on the covenant path or whatever it is? What is the right decision? And that freezes us rather than saying, okay, I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to do something. I'm going to see what happens. And then from that, I'm going to gather some data. I'm going to use that to help me figure out what are the beliefs, what are the things that are element, what are the things I need to change and adjust so that I can bring myself closer and closer and closer into aligning with that non-physical thing that was created. Because essentially, here's us. Here is the non-physical version of what it is we want, this new state. It's here, it's steady, it's held. And we go on this journey of experimenting with lots of different things to figure out, am I closer, am I not? We use our emotions. Oh, Krista, experiment upon the word. Yes, yes, exactly. To bring us closer and closer to being that thing. But if we didn't have this spiritual, intangible creation by God of that version of us, we wouldn't have anything to compare to be navigating to help us know where we're going. Another verse that I love to use is actually in Come Follow Me this week with Joseph Smith, and all these things shall be for thy experience, right? And shall be for your good. We tend to think about it as like, oh, I can learn this lesson, or like there's a reason that I have to go through this, rather than being like, no, this is an experiment to give you data, right? A scientist takes the base knowledge and current understanding that they have, right? So there is still a purpose to study, to gain that base information, to gather the best that we can. But then they put a hypothesis out there and they're like, okay, this is what I think is going to happen. I'm going to test it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to gather the data. I'm going to look back on it and I'm going to go, okay, what adjustment do I need to make? Now I have a new collection of data and a new starting place. And that's where I'm going to start again. And this is a process we can do for our relationships. It's one we do for our homes. We're going to be talking about that next on day 2. How do you start applying this process to figuring out what is the right organizing system that I need? Here's what I think it is. Then we're going to try that. Does it work? And go through this same process. It applies for so many areas of our life, because every experience, every relationship, every physical thing in our life is something we are creating. And therefore, this 4-step process of creation applies to all of it. And the better we get at using it in one area, the better we get in other areas. And it just turns from this place where I'm surviving life and trying to make it through and trying to become this perfect thing to I'm playing here in life. I get to have fun with this process. This is why I came to Earth. This is why I signed up and said, yes, I want to go and get a physical body. I want to have my agency. Those two things were key. I think it's not an accident that we talk about how important it was that we got physical bodies and that we had agency. We needed to have the ability to choose in order to run the experience. And we needed a physical body so that we could be playing here and having this experience of creating on a whole new level. And I think this process is one that will just continue through the eternities in different forms. We get to learn a new way of creating and a new way of creating until we continue our progression to become like our heavenly parents. This is just one playground that we get to experience that in. Kirsten.
I love that so much. And I'm starting to see where the masculine and feminine cycle work here, because, and even in your chart here, because in the different parts, it's like the asking is your initial like feminine, right? Like your creative part. And then as the cycle goes through, it's the outward. So maybe that's like, like sending that ask to God with your desires. And then once it comes to the contraction, that's like the masculine part, right? It's like receiving the components that was made for your path. And then the inward, which is like getting to that place and, like physically taking that stuff inward. That's super cool. Yeah. And I like looking at it playfully too. That's super awesome.
It's really fun. It's cool to see. And again, that kind of can bring us back to like physical, spiritual again can be representative of the feminine, physical can be representative of the masculine. You need both of them. You need your part, you need God's part. Like it's just fun. All of it. Other thoughts or questions here? Checking the chat, making sure we didn't miss anything there. We're good. Okay, well, this is the end of our stuff here. We've gone a little bit over, but I hope it's been enjoyable for all of you. This is the foundation understanding. And then next week, we're going to be diving into really starting to apply this. How do I start practicing this? How do I start doing this in my life? And how do I make it so that the organizing bit can come into play as well? So we'll be going into all of that next time. You should be receiving an email with the replay from today that you can watch. Those are going to be available until the 5th of November. So you want to make sure if you want to rewatch it, go take your notes. You've got about 2 weeks to be able to be doing that. And then I'll be taking the replays down. And then what else? Oh, it will be the same link to join next Saturday. You'll also get an email reminder that will have that link in there again, so you don't have to dig through your inbox to find the original one. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next Saturday, and always feel free to say hi on Instagram, share your thoughts, share your experiences. I love seeing how this all connects to you and the aha moments you have. And I'm grateful for all of you for being here. It's been a wonderful day. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.